This is the second video for application of compression. Now, if you're dealing with a multi-track recording that has distorted guitars, it's very important to note that distortion actually acts as a form of compression. So the dynamic range of a signal is capped or is limited to a specific point. If you have a clean guitar signal though, one without distortion, then it probably will need some compression. Now again, the theory of compression applies to all styles of music, and the type of style of music will determine often the level of compression or the amount. So if you've got something acoustic, you'll probably want to deal with soft compression, so ratios that are around about 2 to 1. Something a bit more poppy, probably 4 to 1, and something that's really heavy, you're probably looking at compressions of 8 to 1. When you get to ratio levels of 10 to 1, you're then actually starting to limit. And a limiter is another form of processor that helps to control dynamics of a signal. So for a multi-track recording that has distorted guitars, we should be EQing them and we shouldn't really be applying compression. However, for a bass guitar part that is clean, we would probably apply compression. Now, the application of compression again, in terms of its ratio, 4 to 1, medium, so not too heavy. The attack, very quick. The release time, about 1.5 seconds, in order to make sure that the bass remains fairly consistent in its dynamic and the level of compression. The threshold set to around about -25 in this instance, and then the gain adjusted according to the gain reduction meter. So if we watch the bass guitar part, and we can hear the compression, it's very heavy. Now, if you wanted to reduce the amount of compression, you could reduce the threshold, and then we begin to hear more of that dynamic range of the bass part. And if you did want that, what you would need to do is you would need to reduce your gain to account for the change of your threshold. So that's bass. Kick drum, much the same, so a ratio, again, quite consistent release. Threshold a little bit higher because of the level of that signal, and then gain reduction, or rather the gain makeup gain applied according to gain reduction. So peaking at around about 6 decibels. With application of compression to the snare drum, it is much the same. But then when you're dealing with something like an overhead for a drum kit, you're probably going to want to make sure that the compression is a bit softer. So a ratio of 2 to 1, similar attack and release times, although if you wanted there to be a bit more room in terms of dynamic range, you could reduce your release time perhaps to say something like 500 milliseconds, so that the compression isn't as noticeable. And then you could also reduce your threshold, and your gain level ought to be set according to your gain reduction. So listening to the overheads now, a minimal amount of compression, and that is all really that is needed, because once your song goes out onto radio, it will then be compressed as an overall mix, which doesn't need to be applied now that you're producing your coursework for your A level, and also when you go out into the industry, your work would be sent to mastering studios and would be compressed, ready for radio. So that's an approach to the use of compression for a multi-track recording that has a sort of a more rocky edge. But again, to clarify, if you're making use of compression and you're wanting something sort of soft, ratios of 2 to 1, less gain reduction is good because it helps for the dynamic contrasts, whereas something that is perhaps more akin to Metallica, we'll probably be looking at ratios of 8 to 1, and then therefore gain reduction and makeup gain being a lot higher. So now with that mix completed, everything will now sound a lot brighter, clearer, punchier. It will have its own place especially in terms of the stereo field and also the frequency spectrum. So we'll have a little listen.
Here lies a city on fire, singing along the arsonist's choir. Now here I go. It started with a spark and burned into the dark. Now here I go.
And there you have application of compression. Now the next video will deal with stereo reverb. Thank you for watching.